Dr. Kim Soo-jin wiped the sweat from her forehead as she carefully brushed away the last bits of alien dust from the crystalline structure. The dig site on Kepler 442b had been her home for 6 months, and every day brought new mysteries from this ancient world. But today felt different. The air itself seemed to hum with secrets waiting to be uncovered. "Hey, Soo-jin, you need to see this," called out Dr. Park Hyun-woo from across the excavation pit. His voice carried an excitement that made her pulse quicken. The crystalline data core they'd been working on had suddenly begun to glow with soft blue light, responding to their quantum scanners in ways they'd never seen before. Soo-jin knelt beside the ancient artifact, her hands trembling slightly as she connected the translation matrix. The moment the connection was established, holographic symbols began dancing in the air above them. These weren't just random markings, they were a language, complex and beautiful, telling a story that would change everything humanity thought. They knew about the galaxy. "Professor Lee, are you getting this transmission?" Soo-jin spoke into her communicator, her voice barely above a whisper. The symbols were translating themselves, revealing truths that made her stomach turn cold with fear. Back on Earth, Professor Lee Min-ho was reviewing research papers in his Seoul office when the emergency transmission came through. The holographic display flickered to life, showing Soo-jin's pale face against the backdrop of alien ruins. "What have you found?" he asked, though something in her expression already told him this wasn't good news. "The Zephyrians," Soo-jin began, her voice shaking as she read from the floating symbols. "They're not what they claimed to be. These records go back 50,000 years, Min-ho. They show a pattern, a horrible systematic pattern. The data core was revealing the true history of the galaxy, and it was nothing like the peaceful narrative the Zephyrians had shared during first contact 6 months ago. The elegant blue-skinned aliens had arrived at Earth with gifts of technology and promises of galactic brotherhood. They spoke of peace, of scientific advancement, of humanity joining a vast community of civilized worlds. It was all lies. The ancient records showed world after world falling to the same deception. The Zephyrians would arrive at civilizations just on the verge of developing faster than light travel. They would offer friendship, technology, cultural exchange. Then, once they had catalogued the species' capabilities and weaknesses, the true nature of their visit would be revealed. "They're slavers, Min-ho," Soo-jin continued reading, her voice getting stronger with anger. "They've been doing this for millennia. Species that show promise are either enslaved or eliminated. The ones that submit become workers, miners, soldiers in their empire. The ones that resist are wiped out completely." Professor Lee's face went white as he processed the implications. Earth's first contact had followed the exact same pattern. The Zephyrians had arrived with smiles and gifts, studying human technology, mapping their colonies, cataloging their military capabilities. They'd even established cultural exchange centers in major cities, claiming to want to learn about human civilization. "Professor," came another voice from the dig site. Jung-min Seo, the team's xenobiology specialist, had been analyzing other artifacts. "You need to see what we found in the lower chambers. There are preserved specimens down here, dozens of different species. All of them show signs of neural modification." Soo-jin's camera feed switched to show the underground chambers they'd recently opened. Row upon row of crystalline preservation tubes lined the walls, each containing the remains of different alien species. Some were humanoid, others insectoid, a few that defied easy classification. But they all shared one horrifying trait: surgical, scars along their skulls where neural implants had been installed. "These aren't just records," Min Seo explained, her voice tight with disgust. "This is a museum, a collection of their conquests. Look at the dates on these preservation chambers. Some of these species were enslaved over 10,000 years ago." The translation matrix continued working, revealing more details about the Zephyrian operation. They would identify promising worlds decades in advance, seeding them with observation posts disguised as research stations. They studied each species' psychology, their social structures, their technological capabilities. By the time first contact was made, they already knew exactly how to manipulate their new victims. "Earth has been under observation for 50 years, Soo-jin read from the data stream. "They've been watching us, studying us, preparing for this moment. Our space program, our internet, our global communications, they've been monitoring everything. But there was something else in the data that caught her attention. References to a few species that had somehow escaped the Zephyrian trap. Worlds that had discovered the truth before it was too late and gone into hiding among the stars. The records were fragmentary, but they suggested that somewhere out there a resistance existed. Professor Lee was already mobilizing response teams back on Earth, but he knew they had to be careful. If the Zephyrians suspected that their secret was discovered, they might accelerate their timeline. The invasion could begin immediately. Sujin, pack everything you can carry, he ordered. We need to get this information to the right people before it's too late. Humanity's freedom depends on what you found today. As the team worked frantically to copy the alien database, none of them noticed the small probe that had been silently watching from the ruins above. The Zephyrians had contingencies for situations like this, but they had underestimated one crucial factor: human stubbornness and the lengths people would go to protect their freedom. The galaxy's greatest secret was finally out, and the real war was about to begin. Commander Park Ji-hoon was reviewing navigation charts when the emergency transmission crackled through the bridge speakers of the UES Harmony. The massive starship had been humanity's pride for barely 2 years. Designed for deep space exploration and first contact missions, now it might become their lifeline for survival. Sir, we're receiving a Priority 1 transmission from Kepler 442b, announced Lieutenant Yoon Da-hee from the communications station. It's Dr. Kim's archaeological team, and the signal is heavily encrypted. Ji-hoon straightened in his captain's chair as Dr. Kim Soo-jin's face appeared on the main view screen. Her usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by barely controlled panic. The data she transmitted made his blood run cold. The Zephyrians weren't peaceful explorers. They were galactic slavers who had been operating for 50,000 years. Captain Choi, Ji-hoon called to his second-in-command, who was studying tactical displays at a nearby console. Captain Choi. Hyojin had served with him for 8 years, and he trusted her judgment more than anyone else aboard the ship. Already analyzing the data, sir, she replied, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. According to these records, we're not the first to discover their secret. Look at this. The main screen shifted to show a star map dotted with colored markers. Red indicated enslaved worlds, yellow showed planets under observation, but there were scattered blue dots throughout the galaxy, worlds that had somehow escaped or were actively resisting. The Klaxons were the first to figure it out, Choi explained, highlighting a cluster of blue markers in the Vega sector. These insectoid beings have a hive-mind communication system that the Zephyrians couldn't fully control. When they tried to enslave a Klaxon colony world 300 years ago, the entire species felt the attack and went underground. Ji-hoon studied the tactical data with growing amazement. The Klaxons had transformed from peaceful herbivores into master saboteurs, using their ability to coordinate perfectly across vast distances to strike Zephyrian operations throughout their territory. The Nerians are even more impressive, Choi continued, zooming in on another section of the galaxy. These aquatic beings figured out how to hide entire civilizations in the deep ocean trenches of water worlds. The Zephyrians never bothered to explore underwater. They assumed any intelligent species would be land-based like themselves. The Nerians had created floating cities beneath polar ice caps and in the deepest ocean trenches, developing technology that worked perfectly in aquatic environments but was invisible to Zephyrian sensors designed for atmospheric detection. And the Vorthak, Choi added with genuine admiration. These crystalline beings can literally reshape their molecular structure. They've been infiltrating Zephyrian facilities for decades, gathering intelligence while disguised as their own technology. Before Ji-hoon could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the bridge. "Sir," called out Ensign Kim Jae-min from the sensor station, "we're detecting massive energy signatures from the Titan mining station. Something's wrong." The view screen switched to show long-range sensor readings from humanity's largest asteroid mining operation. What they saw made everyone on the bridge fall silent. The station was still there, but its power signatures were completely different. Instead of the familiar blue glow of human fusion reactors. The entire facility was bathed in the sickly green light of Zephyrian technology. 3 cargo ships have gone missing this week, Choi reported grimly, reviewing the automated distress logs. The last transmission from the cargo vessel Soul Dream mentioned strange new efficiency upgrades being installed by Zephyrian advisors. Ji-hoon realized with growing horror that the integration protocols had already begun. Across human colonies, the friendly alien advisors were implementing their control systems under the pretense of technological assistance. They were transforming human facilities into processing centers for slavery. "Sir, we're receiving a coded transmission," Dahi announced. "It's coming from coordinates that match the resistance network Dr. Kim discovered." The message was unlike anything they'd ever encountered. Instead of normal audiovisual communication, it came as a complex pattern of mathematical sequences, chemical formulas, and quantum resonance frequencies. Their computer systems took several minutes to decode it into understandable language. "Greetings, human vessels." The message began in a synthesized voice that seemed to combine multiple alien speech patterns. "We are the Liberation Front. We know you have discovered the truth about the Confederation. Time is short. Your species is entering the final phase of cataloging. Meet us at the coordinates we are transmitting. Come alone and come silent." The coordinates led to an uncharted nebula in neutral space, far from any known shipping lanes or colonial territories. It would be a dangerous journey, especially if the Zephyrians were already monitoring human communications. "Sir," Choi said quietly, studying the tactical implications, "if we go to this meeting, we're committing to open resistance. There's no going back from this decision." Ji-hoon looked around the bridge at his crew. These men and women had signed up for exploration and scientific discovery, not galactic warfare. But the choice was no longer theirs to make. The Zephyrians had made the decision for them when they decided to enslave humanity. "Set course for the resistance coordinates," he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's future, "and maintain complete communication silence. If they're monitoring our networks, we need to stay invisible until we can link up with the others." As the UES Harmony changed course toward the mysterious nebula, Ji-hoon couldn't help but think about the irony. Humanity had spent decades dreaming of finding other intelligent life in the universe. Now they were about to meet 3 species who would help them fight for the right to remain free. The ship's engines hummed with determination as they headed toward their rendezvous with destiny. Behind them, Earth continued its normal activities, unaware that their freedom hung in the balance of a secret war that had been raging across the galaxy for millennia. In the depths of space, the Liberation Front was waiting, and humanity was about to discover they weren't alone in their fight for survival. The secret meeting took place deep within asteroid base Epsilon 7, a hollowed-out rock drifting in the neutral zone between star systems. Commander Park Ji-hoon had never seen anything like the creatures gathered in the dimly lit chamber. The Klaxon representative stood nearly 3 meters tall, its chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the artificial lights, while multiple eyes tracked every movement in the room with insect-like precision. "Your species fascinates us," clicked the Klaxon through its translation device, its voice sounding like metal scraping against stone. "We have observed the Zephyrian protocols fail against humans in ways we never imagined possible." Beside the towering insectoid, a Nerian delegate floated in a specialized water tank, its translucent blue form rippling with bioluminescent patterns that served as its primary language. The patterns translated to cautious optimism mixed with deep concern. "The aquatic ones have been monitoring your mining stations," explained the crystalline Vorthak, its body shifting between solid and energy states as it spoke. "What we discovered defies all previous understanding of Zephyrian control methods." Lieutenant Colonel Nam Da-yoon listened intently as the alien resistance leaders shared their intelligence. According to their observations, humanity possessed something completely unique, an almost pathological refusal to accept defeat, combined with an ability to innovate under pressure that bordered on the miraculous. Other species either submit to avoid destruction or fight using conventional military tactics, the Klaxon continued. "Humans do something different. When oppressed, you become creatively vindictive. You don't just fight back, you spite fight. Dayun wasn't entirely sure what spite fighting meant until she saw the tactical recordings the aliens had gathered. Humans who discovered Zephyrian deception didn't just resist. They actively sought the most embarrassing and psychologically damaging ways to strike back. Where other species focused on strategic targets, humans seemed to take personal offense at being deceived. "We need to test this theory," Dayun declared, studying the layout of Titan Mining Station on the holographic display. "If human psychology really is different, we need to understand how before we commit to full resistance." The mission to liberate Titan Station became humanity's first real test against Zephyrian control systems. Dayun led a strike team of 20 volunteers aboard a modified cargo vessel, using Vorthak stealth technology to approach the facility undetected. What they found inside the mining station was worse than any nightmare. Hundreds of human workers moved through the corridors with blank expressions, their heads bearing the telltale scars of neural implant surgery. They performed their tasks with mechanical precision, showing no recognition when the rescue team called their names. "Sergeant Lee," Dayun whispered to a demolitions expert, "start placing charges on the Zephyrian control nodes. Dr. Yang, how long do you need to examine these implants?" Dr. Yang Taimin was already scanning the nearest controlled worker with his medical equipment. "Give me 10 minutes to understand what we're dealing with," he replied, his face grim with concentration. But as they worked, something unexpected began happening. The implanted workers started showing signs of distress, not the blank compliance the Zephyrians expected, but actual emotional turmoil. Some were holding their heads, others making small gestures of defiance, like clenching their fists or muttering under their breath. "The implants are malfunctioning," Yang reported with amazement in his voice. "Look at these neural patterns. The control signals are being actively rejected by the brain tissue. It's like their minds are fighting back at the cellular level." The first implant failure happened while they watched. Worker Kang Minjae suddenly stopped mid-task, looked around with clear, angry eyes, and immediately began trying to remove his own neural device with a mining tool. "What did they do to us?" he demanded, his voice shaking with rage. "I remember everything. Every order they forced me to follow. Every thought they tried to suppress. I remember it all." Within minutes, the implant failures were cascading throughout the station. Workers were breaking free from Zephyrian control and immediately beginning acts of sabotage against their former captors. But this wasn't random destruction. It was calculated, vindictive, and deeply personal. "They're not just destroying Zephyrian equipment," observed Sergeant Lee with admiration. "They're reprogramming it to be insulting. Look, that mining laser is now burning rude messages into the station walls in Zephyrian script." Dr. Yang was documenting the phenomenon with scientific fascination. "Human neuroplasticity is unlike anything else in the galaxy. Our brains literally rewire themselves to resist control. The Zephyrians designed these implants for static neural patterns, but human minds are constantly changing and adapting." The liberated workers weren't broken or traumatized. They were absolutely furious and getting more creative about expressing that anger by the minute. Some were rewiring Zephyrian robots to perform embarrassing dances. Others were using the station's communication system to broadcast insulting poetry about their former captors across the galaxy. "Dayun," Yang called out excitedly, "you need to see this. The workers aren't just immune to future control attempts, they're developing the ability to interfere with Zephyrian technology just by being near it. Their modified brain patterns are creating some kind of quantum disruption field." Back on Earth, teams of scientists were already reverse engineering every piece of Zephyrian technology they could get their hands on. But unlike other species, who tried to understand and replicate alien devices, humans were deliberately breaking them down and rebuilding them to be better, faster, and more efficient. "They made one critical mistake," Dayun observed, watching the freed miners coordinate their revenge operations with the kind of gleeful malice that only humans seemed capable of. "They assumed we'd react like every other species they've encountered. But we don't just fight back, we take it personally." The Zephyrians had spent 50,000 years perfecting their enslavement techniques on predictable alien psychologies. They had never encountered a species that responded to oppression by becoming more innovative, more stubborn, and more creatively vindictive. Humanity's spite was about to become the galaxy's most dangerous weapon. The war room aboard the Liberation. Fleet's flagship buzzed with activity as Admiral Kang Subin studied the holographic galaxy map floating before her. What had started as desperate rescue missions just months ago had transformed into something the Zephyrians never saw coming, a coordinated rebellion spanning hundreds of star systems. "Admiral, we're receiving confirmation from all strike teams," reported Commander Yu Junho from the tactical station. "Operation Freedom Chain is ready to execute across 12 systems simultaneously." Subin nodded grimly. The plan was audacious beyond belief. Hit 12 major Zephyrian control centers at exactly the same moment, crippling their ability to coordinate responses across the galaxy. It required perfect timing, flawless communication, and more courage than any single species had ever shown before. "Dr. Lim, are you certain about the communication network?" she asked, turning to the brilliant scientist who had become their secret weapon against Zephyrian technology. Dr. Lim Wu-jin looked up from his quantum computer array, his eyes bright with the satisfaction of someone who had just pulled off the impossible. "Admiral, we're not just intercepting their messages, we're controlling their entire surveillance network. Every spy drone, every monitoring station, every data relay is now working for us." The breakthrough had come when Wu-jin realized that Zephyrian technology was designed around absolute hierarchical control. Their quantum network assumed that all commands came from the top down, with no possibility of rebellion from within the system itself. They had never considered that someone might hack their network not by breaking it, but by convincing it that the hackers were actually higher-ranking Zephyrians issuing legitimate orders. "Show them the deep space intercepts," Subin ordered. The main display shifted to show captured Zephyrian communications from the past week. The alien overlords were panicking. For 50,000 years, they had operated with perfect predictability. Identify a species, catalog their capabilities, implement control protocols, harvest their labor. But humanity had introduced chaos into their orderly system. "Look at this. Transmission from Sector Command." Wu-jin highlighted one particular message. "They're calling us a psychologically unstable anomaly and requesting emergency protocols for dealing with spite-based warfare tactics. They literally don't have procedures for fighting enemies who take things personally." But the real revolution wasn't happening in space. It was happening in the minds of enslaved species across the galaxy. Captain Shin Bo-ra had been working with the mixed species resistance cells, and what she discovered was changing everything. "The Klaxons are adapting human military concepts to their hive mind structure," Bo-ra reported during the daily briefing. "Instead of one centralized command, they're creating multiple independent decision-making clusters that can act autonomously. It's like giving every part of their collective consciousness the ability to think for itself." The results were spectacular. Klaxon strike teams were now capable of independent creative thinking while maintaining perfect coordination with their larger collective. They could improvise, adapt to changing circumstances, and even develop individual personalities while sharing information instantaneously across their network. "The Nerians are even more impressive," Bo-ra continued. "They've taken our concept of democratic voting and applied it to their entire civilization. Instead of following traditional elder councils, they're making decisions through rapid consensus building. That includes every adult member of their species." The aquatic beings had transformed from a slow, tradition-bound society into a dynamic force capable of making complex strategic decisions in real time. Their deep-sea cities were becoming mobile, able to relocate entire populations to support resistance operations while remaining completely invisible to Zephyrian sensors. But it was the Vorthak who had embraced human concepts most enthusiastically. The crystalline beings had always been individuals, but they had never understood the concept of cooperation between equals. Now they were forming voluntary alliances, sharing resources freely, and even developing what could only be called friendship bonds with other species. "Scientific collaboration is blowing their minds," laughed Lieutenant Kim So-young, who had been working with Vorthak researchers. They spent millions of years believing that knowledge was power, and power meant keeping secrets. Now they're sharing everything they know and discovering that collaborative research produces results faster than anything they ever imagined. The liberation campaigns were succeeding beyond anyone's wildest dreams. World after world was breaking free from Zephyrian control, not just because of superior firepower, but because entire populations were learning to think differently about freedom, cooperation, and resistance. "Admiral," called out Ensign Park Min-jun from the communications array, "we're receiving reports from the Vega Liberation Fleet. They've successfully freed the Klaxon homeworld, and the celebration broadcasts are being picked up across 3 sectors." The news was spreading faster than the Zephyrians could suppress it. Species that had been enslaved for millennia were hearing about successful rebellions and realizing that freedom was possible, but more importantly, they were learning that they didn't have to fight alone. The Confederation's worst nightmare is becoming reality, Subin observed, watching the tactical display show red Zephyrian territories turning blue as world after world joined the rebellion. They're facing something they never prepared for, a galaxy-wide slave revolt led by the species they considered least dangerous. The irony was perfect. Humanity had been targeted for enslavement precisely because they seemed primitive and harmless. The Zephyrians had assumed that a species still fighting wars on their home planet couldn't possibly pose a threat to a galactic empire. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. The galaxy was awakening, and humanity had shown them how. To fight back, the massive liberation fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Nexus Prime system, and General O Minseo felt her breath catch at the sight before them. The Zephyrian capital world hung in space, like a monument to galactic tyranny, its surface covered in towering spires built from the crystallized remains of extinct civilizations. Each building was a gravestone, each street paved with the dreams of species that had dared to resist 50,000 years ago. "Fleet status report," Minseo commanded from the bridge of the flagship Soul's Pride, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. 2,000 vessels from 47 different species, all reporting ready for combat, responded Captain Baek Soo-jin, her tactical officer. "The Klaxon battle clusters are maintaining perfect formation. Nerian deep strike squadrons are positioned for 3-dimensional assault, and Vorthak infiltration units have already begun system penetration." The sight of the combined fleet was breathtaking. Sleek human destroyers flew alongside chitinous Klaxon hive ships that moved like living creatures through space. Nerian vessels resembled massive sea creatures adapted for void travel, their translucent hulls rippling with bioluminescent weapon systems. The Vorthak ships were the most unsettling, constantly shifting between solid matter and pure energy, making them nearly impossible for enemy sensors to track. "General," called out Commander Lee Tae-young from the communications station, "we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian High Council. They want to negotiate." Minseo's laugh was cold as space itself. "After 50,000 years of slavery and genocide, they want to talk? Tell them the time for negotiations ended when they decided to treat sapient beings like livestock." The Zephyrian response was swift and brutal. The planet's surface erupted with defensive fire as massive orbital platforms revealed themselves, each one capable of destroying entire fleets. But the liberation forces had learned from humanity's greatest tactical advantage: unpredictability. "Klaxon. Clusters execute pattern Delta 7, Minseo ordered. Nerian squadrons begin spiral descent. Vorthak units, you know what to do." The battle that followed defied every conventional rule of space warfare. The Klaxons moved with perfect hive-mind coordination, but each cluster made independent tactical decisions, creating a swarm intelligence that adapted faster than any computer system could track. Their ships darted between orbital platforms like angry insects, striking weak points with surgical precision. The Nerians turned the 3-dimensional nature of space combat into an art form. Their vessels moved in impossible spirals and loops, attacking from angles that shouldn't have existed. Using gravitational fields and stellar radiation as weapons, they fought like they were swimming through an ocean of stars. But it was the Vorthak who proved most devastating to Zephyrian technology. Their ability to interface directly with enemy systems meant that Zephyrian weapons began turning on each other, Orbital platforms fired on their own ships, and defensive shields collapsed without warning. "General!" shouted Ensign Park Jimin from the sensor station. Massive energy buildup detected at the planet's core. They're activating something big. The main display zoomed in to show a colossal structure rising from the heart of Nexus Prime. The quantum sterilization device was larger than most space stations, its crystalline surfaces pulsing with enough energy to turn entire solar systems into lifeless void. "All ships, emergency withdrawal to safe distance," Minseo commanded, but she knew it was already too late. The weapon's charging cycle would complete before they could retreat far enough to survive the blast. That's when engineer Han Jiwoo's voice crackled through the communications system. "General, I'm reading the power flow patterns from inside their primary reactor complex. I think I can overload their entire grid, but someone needs to get close to the core." Minseo felt her heart drop. Jiwoo was aboard one of the infiltration shuttles that had managed to penetrate the planet's defenses. Getting to the reactor core meant flying directly into the most heavily defended area of the entire Zephyrian Empire. Jiwoo, the defensive. "Fire around that reactor will tear any ship apart," she protested, even as she knew what he was planning to do. "Not if I use the maintenance tunnels," came his reply, and she could hear the determination in his voice. "I can get inside their power grid and cause a cascade failure. The explosion will take out their weapon and probably half the planet, but it'll stop them from sterilizing the galaxy." The quantum weapon continued charging, its energy readings climbing toward the point where it could destroy not just star systems, but entire sectors of space. Across the fleet, thousands of beings from dozens of species watched their sensor displays with growing horror. "Jiwoo, there has to be another way," Minseo pleaded, though she knew there wasn't. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Someone had to make the sacrifice, or billions would die. "General, with respect, we both know this is the only option," Jiwoo replied, his voice growing fainter as he moved deeper into the enemy facility. "I've been monitoring their power systems for months. I know exactly where to hit them to cause maximum damage." Through the tactical display, Minseo watched Jiwoo's life sign moving through the bowels of Nexus Prime, past automated defenses and through security barriers that should have been impossible to breach. But human stubbornness and spite had carried him this far. "Tell my family," Jiwoo transmitted one final time. "Tell them I helped free the galaxy." The explosion that followed was visible from 3 star systems away. The quantum weapon didn't just malfunction. It turned the entire planet into a miniature supernova, consuming the Zephyrian capital and everything within 1,000,000 kilometers. The shockwave carried the screams of 50,000 years of tyranny into the cosmic void. But Jiwoo's sacrifice did more than destroy their ultimate weapon. The explosion severed the quantum communication links that held the Zephyrian Empire together. Across the galaxy, slave worlds found their orbital control, platforms going dark, their Zephyrian overseers losing contact with their command structure. "All Liberation fleets, this is General Minseo," she broadcast across every frequency. "Nexus Prime has fallen. The Zephyrian command structure is broken. Today, we free every enslaved world in the galaxy." The systematic liberation that followed took months, but it was more like a celebration than a war. World after world threw off their chains as the news spread. Species that had been enslaved for millennia tasted freedom for the first time, and they found that humans had been right. Liberty was worth any sacrifice. In the aftermath, as the new Galactic Council convened for the first time on neutral ground, representatives from hundreds of species gathered to create something that had never existed before, a government based on equality, cooperation, and the radical human idea that every sapient being had inherent rights that no authority could take away. General Minseo stood before the assembly, no longer a military commander but a teacher, helping newly free civilizations understand what democracy meant. The age of slavery was over, ended by the species the Zephyrians had considered least dangerous. Engineer Han Jiwoo's sacrifice had lit a flame that would burn across the galaxy for generations to come. Humanity had shown the universe how to break its chains, and the galaxy would never be the same. The end.